All right. So, Professor Zholkovsky, in what context did you first become aware of Bulat Akujava's poetry and music?
First, of course, not the poetry, but somehow this sound echoes there. I don't know. First off, he became very famous in this underground, unofficial way. His songs among us, I was in my early 20s when already I was aware of his songs and they would be recorded. But I never actually went to a concert until rather very late. Sometime in the 70s, I don't remember exactly when. It was in the Centralny Dom Literatorov, in the Writers Club in Moscow, and he was given a chance to have a concert. I think it was his one-man's concert, and I remember he started it by, he was applauded by the audience, he was expected by everybody, he was well received, and he said something like, "Ну что же, давайте собираться в прошлое. Let us get together and go into the past." Because one of his typical messages in his poetry is this romantic, never has been, maybe kind of romantic, knightly, Blockian, whatever, the past, which is much better than the current Soviet Russia situation. Давайте собираться в прошлое. I always liked his songs, and at some point started studying them as poetry and testing on them my favorite ideas of finding out invariants, how every song is another version of the same song, so that there is a stable thing there. And at some point I was ready to give a talk. I gave a talk twice. First it was very tentative at some scholarly conference, and it was a very successful talk because I didn't know much about what I was talking about, and this is the best way to provoke interest in the audience, and they would prompt things and they would feel part of it, and it's much better than having all the answers and just hitting the audience on the head with your absolutely final knowledge that doesn't go smoothly over. And after that, I finally more or less finished doing that piece. It has been published, reprinted several times. It's based on the poem, on the song Stary Pidžak, the old jacket, whatever. And I gave it in one of the centers of then human thought in the humanities, VNIT, the Institute for Scientific Information. They had an audience maybe of 200 or 300 people, huge, because it was a combination of an interest in the structuralist methods, which I represented then, and also in the semi-banned, semi-official poet. Everybody knew every line by heart anyway. This you can only have with either Pushkin or with, at that point, Akujava. Everybody knew the quotes so that I could manipulate the examples and so on and so forth. They put on a recording so that it was almost like a little bit of a concert, whatever. I actually made bold to try to invite Akujava to come to this talk. And through some friends, I wasn't personally acquainted, through some friends, I got the phone number, I called him, was very nice about it, said yes, he was very flattered, he will come, blah, blah, blah. But then later on, when it came to actually coming the next day, I called him again to remind, and he said, no, it so happens, I'm sick, I cannot come. When is going to be the next time? I was so frustrated that I came back with, this is not a concert, this is one-time thing. He, of course, would repeat his concerts many times. He was very nice about it, and later on we had some, once again, contacts through other people, through notes, whatever. I eventually published the article, sent it to him, and for a year didn't hear back from him. Then, when I finally, I think I met him, or maybe he sent a note saying, for a year I could not find out what your name and patronymic was, and without that I could not write a note to you, because he always was or played at being this kind of old-time gentleman, kind of rather resurrecting the image of a gentleman, of a nobility, whatever it is, so that without a patronymic he couldn't address me. Then I met him several times in this country, in California, a couple of times. Those were not concerts, just meetings at friends' houses. That was more or less about it. But he always, since after a certain while, he always recognized me as one of the early specialists on Akujava. So that even after his death, his widow Olga, she would invite me to appear somewhere in a volume collection of essays, or at some event, whatever, so that eventually we kind of got acquainted, but still in a very rather remote way. Mostly it was my scholarly way of trying to find out what it is, what Akujava is all about. Mm-hmm. By the way, one of my discoveries, I'm kidding, is that Bulat Akujava is a perfect combination of syllables, stresses, and so on. It's a perfect label. Yeah. Bulat Akujava. Mm-hmm. You as scholars can realize that.
Great.
It's very, very iambic.
Yeah. Yes. So do you think that you could briefly speak to Akujava's importance as sort of a cultural figure in Russia?
And what else?
In Russia, both when he was performing in the Soviet Union, but also kind of to this day?
I'm afraid I'll say all the obvious things. He was clearly a major cultural event, first unofficial, then gradually more or less official. In a sense, a precursor and predecessor of the perestroika and the later reforms that happened. Actually, his travel into the past actually materialized when all the streets were renamed back into the kinds of streets he liked calling them by, the names that he would call them in his songs, and then those names would come back and stick. They are there still. But in general, he exemplified, he embodied a very, very crucial combination of, he started out as a kind of a Komsomol, Soviet youth kind of discourse mentality poet, gradually shifting in the direction of unofficial and then kind of semi-Christian worldview, combining kind of softening, the image, the emblem of the saw is exactly right there. He's part of the sawing out, the melting of the hardline Soviet ideology gradually into a kind of a Christian, from militant to pacifist ideology, and so on and so forth. As a poet, he kind of is a second kind of softer coming of Bloch, I would say, in Russian poetry. He's a kind of a lower scale symbolist, one born again symbolist, something like that. And the motifs of his poetry that I focused on, they are all about all these modalities of looking at things: hope, attempt, striving, trying, beginning. All of this is kind of very everything is beginning, hoping to materialize, maybe will not. Lines like "Надежды, когда надежды нет," you hope when there is no hope, and so on and so forth. And in that, he was very much in tune with what was happening in the 60s and later on in Europe and Latin America, among other things, because there was this liberation theology, as you know probably, where the church, the Catholic Church, would become leftist, would be leaning left and combining its efforts at fighting against the dictatorships all over the place, so that he exemplifies in a way this very interesting compromise between what is known as socialism with a human face, and that human face is very Christian, I would say.
Okay, great. Well, Professor Zholkovsky, thank you. I think that's
you're welcome.
Our questions about Akujava.
This will be it with Akujava, yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.